Today, I'm delighted to be joined by John O'Neill. John is Rector of the High School of Glasgow, one of Scotland's top independent schools. I'm looking forward to hearing his insights into leadership, school culture, and professional growth. Welcome, John, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Stuart. Thank you very much. Looking forward to this opportunity and hopefully sharing some insights that may be of value to others. I've certainly always found these opportunities to be valuable for myself, so hopefully I can pass something on.
Wonderful. No, I'm sure that you can, and we're delighted that you're here today. So you have been leading the High School of Glasgow for nearly a decade, successfully steering one of Scotland's top independent schools through a variety of challenges. So I wondered if you could start by sharing what initially drew you into leadership and what keeps you passionate about your role.
Yeah, I think, and possibly others out there who are school leaders or aspiring school leaders, I'm a great example of the accidental leader on the one hand, in all honesty. It wasn't something that I set out and planned to do. I left university, came into teaching and thought, goodness, someone's going to pay me money to teach history and read medieval history books. This sounds like a good gig in life. And really that was the starting point. But within a few weeks of that, you start to realise that actually the transference of knowledge and skills and so forth is built on understanding the whole child and understanding their context. And you begin to move to that social emotional understanding and appreciation. And really for me, that was the kind of light bulb moment in terms of my interest in the whole child. And then through opportunities that arrives in your first sort of school to get involved in pastoral activities and so forth. And it's through those early encounters in staff meetings and dealing with parents over a particular pupil, whatever it may be, that I began to realise that actually, if you're going to have some influence on the child, then actually that influence can happen as much outside the classroom as what you're doing inside the classroom, and opportunities around that area. I suppose also in your own personality or your own character. I've never been a complainer, Stuart. I'm not the kind of person that complains. And obviously as a leader, I have to understand that there are plenty of people who complain and feel comfortable doing so. I'm more a doer and keen to take initiatives. And I think the most important thing for me personally in terms of my career, and particularly I'm over now 22 years in form of school leadership roles, has actually been other people and the investment and the encouragement that other people around me have given me in terms of the opportunities to experience more responsibility, to experience, support for any initiatives and so forth. And that investment of others in myself has been critical. And that's something that I've taken with me in terms of how I approach leadership and how I approach my own school and my own context. And I suppose in the passionate, well, society, economy, technology, climate, it all keeps changing. And therefore, at the very root of all of that is education and the need for us to be equipping ourselves as a humanity for the world we're in and the world to be. And certainly in a school context, that's a huge responsibility in terms of what we're passing on to the next generation. And that always has been a driving passion of mine and motivation. And therefore, you can't sit still. One of my favourite books on schools is by a Roy Blatchford, a John Catt publication called The Restless School. And I always think, that book in and of itself was a great inspiration early on to me, because a school has to be restless. You can't stand still. You have to be engaging with the way social mores are moving, generations are changing, never mind technology and everything else. And if we think about the world we're in today, one of the things that concerns me most about what we're doing in school is how do we equip children to disagree agreeably, for example? What diplomatic skills do we need in a much more polarised context? And in fact, I'm very fortunate because the High School of Glasgow is a 3 to 18-year-old all through school. And therefore, I'm very mindful, and I focus with my team and colleagues on the fact that I've got children in my care who won't leave school until 2038. And so thinking about it in those terms in a kind of good ancestor kind of set of terms is really important. And that's what keeps me absolutely passionate and excited about what we get the opportunity to do every day.
I think that is really interesting just to hear you talking about change almost, and how change is something that is keeping us motivated. And I feel certain that a lot of the things you've mentioned there will resonate with those that are watching or listening back to this. And it kind of leads me into the next thing that I wanted to talk about to some extent, because you talked about different phases of leadership and being supported by others, then you supporting others. And I'm just wondering, that idea of change, I think, is going to come through in your response to this next question. But if you can, can you tell us, in some sense, what has been your guiding philosophy or your leadership style at the High School of Glasgow, and how, I think, importantly, has that evolved, maybe even in response to different challenges over the years?
I would say at the start, and I've given some thought to this, at the start, you inherit this position and this opportunity to actually lead a whole school. So you're no longer a deputy, or you're no longer a head of department. Every eye in the place is on you, and you recognise that quite quickly. And yes, people talk about imposter syndromes and so forth. I suppose for me, I found that initially, and I'll be honest, very, very difficult to navigate. And therefore you put on some clothes, as it were, metaphorically, in terms of how you're going to approach certain things. Yes, the colleagues that you know and who you're working with in your own team, you build up a good rapport there. But initially I found myself probably thinking, I've got to be responsible for everything. I've got to know everything. I've got to understand everything. And then you realise that actually you're not very good at any of that. You can't understand everything. You can't know everything. And in fact, there's only 24 hours in a day and you have to do other things. And so I personally found myself exhausted at one point as a result of that, in terms of how I approached. So it affects you physically, it affects you mentally, in terms of being ultra responsible. And I suppose for a lot of teachers, and I would say in our profession generally, Stuart, we are people who are in a caring profession. We are people who are predisposed to the sense of duty, senses of service, senses of generosity and helping. And so for a leader, when you're first dealing with everything, you kind of have those values deep in you, in your core, but actually they're not necessarily the most productive values ultimately, until you realise that you're running out of steam because you're trying to do so many things. And at that point, at that inflection point for me, I started to realise that you can't do anything without people. They're absolutely critical. The only way you can do anything is with people. And you have to be who you are, first and foremostly. It's something I say to my school captains. It's something I say to any pupil. It's something I say to any member of staff in my school. Be who you are, first and foremostly. Don't be something else. Don't believe you have to be something else. Be who you are. Yes, you're going to make decisions on occasions and communicate things on occasions that, for example, might be very assertive. We have to do this and we're doing it now. The mode that you choose, the language that you choose, the way that you do that, make that you. Don't make that some semblance of you. Be you and be authentic around that. And I suppose I then reflected back on something I've carried through life, and it's a little quote, and I'm a big quotes man. I enjoy my quotes, but it's a quote from Augustine of Hippo, and it's something that anybody walking into my room will immediately see. It's the first thing they'll see, and it simply says that I learned more from those who talked to me than those who taught me. And that is fundamental to my philosophy, having learned from trying to do too much to actually think, right, talk to people, listen to people, really listen to people, recognize the qualities and skills of other people, quickly recognize the things that you're absolutely hopeless at, John, and tell yourself that, and hand those things and inspire those things in those that are much, much better equipped, no matter where they are within the organization, actually doing that. They'll get great things from that. Your school and your children, most importantly, will. So do those things. And I think it's that for me that then led me to engage with extra reading. I did some courses as well, and seminars, and distilled a lot of things down to ultimately trying wherever possible in my leadership to do the right thing at the right time in the right way. And that can be lots of different things, of course. It's not a fixed model, but my guiding philosophy is people first, listen to them, engage with them, and then when you are making decisions, try to make decisions at the right time, but critically in the right way too. And stand back, serve the purpose. Don't think you have to control the purpose. Don't think you have to lead the purpose. Serve the purpose. And actually, what I enjoy now, when I was standing at an inset a few weeks ago at the start of term, I'm not involved. They hardly hear from me. It's the staff that lead it. It's the staff that talk. And I said to myself at that point, Stuart, that's where we've got to, John. That's where we should be. It's not about you having to do this. Look what you have created here now. And I'll be honest with you and those that are listening, it's one of the most emotional and proud moments of my time as a leader was actually just to sit at the back of the audience and do hardly anything that day. And that to me is what leadership ultimately should be about.
That's a fantastic answer there, and I appreciate you being so open in talking about your own experiences there. I think it takes strength to be able to admit that we sometimes take on too much, and to be able to recognise that, and then to be able to talk about that. It allows others to maybe say, well, perhaps I'm doing a little bit too much. Am I putting myself first? But coming through really strongly for me there was a few things. First of all, that idea of bringing up people around you, supporting others, and trying to essentially make yourself, no longer necessary. You've developed that talent to such a point that you can sit back and allow everybody to flourish in the garden that you've been tending. To some extent, that's exactly the same for classroom teachers.
Exactly.
When the students come through, certainly when I was teaching, I think groups of students would always be surprised when I said, I would like for you to be a much better mathematician than I am. Yeah. And they would think, oh no, that's, you're the teacher, but that's what we're trying to do. Otherwise we don't get the growth. So by factoring in people into your decision-making, you're obviously starting to develop a culture. How big a part do you think culture plays in the success of a school? And more importantly, I think, what actions have you been sort of taking to try and build and sustain a strong, positive school culture?
I think I would absolutely agree with you and echo the fact, that, in the way that I said, you can't do anything without people. Well, another aspect you've got to think about within schools or in any organisation, but how you feel is going to have a huge impact on the way that you approach anything in terms of your levels of engagement, your levels of consideration, whether you're enjoying something or not. And that's a really interesting thing, because what can happen, and I liked your point there in terms of the classroom as well. What I'd like to say there is that for a school leader, the way I see it now is the school's my classroom. Whether you're 56 years old in my school or whether you're 3 years old in my school, it's the classroom. It's that same type of approach that's been taken. And that might sound in some cases quite, if I was saying that 10 years ago, I would have felt quite arrogant about thinking, oh, I'm teaching these adults, as it were. But no, what I'm doing is I'm utilising the very point you made, Stuart. I'm utilising what we do as teachers and what we seek to do in terms of our climate in our classrooms and what we seek to develop there. But we're doing it as a whole school community and taking some of those lessons from my classroom experience into the whole school setting. And I would say that because how you feel is going to be absolutely fundamental, then to me, the number one responsibility, day in, day out, is the culture of the school. It is the one thing that I concern myself. If you were asking me, what's your key priority for the High School of Glasgow, it's making sure that we steward the culture and that we evolve that culture as social mores change and so forth, but that we keep to particular values, particular approaches, etc. And as a leader, the actions that you take there is, first of all, recognizing that your behavior is the number one thing. Because back to my point about when you first get appointed and you realize that everybody knows you and you don't really know everybody else, and in that kind of role, and former pupils and the wider community and such like, this whole set of stakeholders, as they're called, but I like to use the word community that's involved. You then realize that how you behave, every interaction that you have, no matter how minor, has an impact. Now, that's true in daily life as it is in leadership. But as a leader, being aware of that and being cognizant to that and self-aware is critically important. If you do it, other people will follow it. There's I remember watching a great little video of a chap trying to get Highland cattle from one field into another field. And he tried umpteen different things. I won't bore you with all the details. But the best part was when he started just actually talking to the cows and walking with them. And guess what? They all walked into the other field. And the reality of watching that was, yes, everything you do, how you behave, if you're wanting anything from courtesy and respect, positive relations, candor, the willingness to apologise, and I've apologised many a time. I've apologised to a junior school pupil as well as I've apologised to a member of staff or a member of my team, because I'm a human being and I'll get things wrong. And the willingness to do that, that's critical. So your behaviour goes without question. Tied into that, I think it's also keep saying thank you. Really, really important. Be kind and say thank you. I get tennis elbows through the number of handwritten cards that I will write in any 1 week to thank people. Why? Because so much of what we do in education doesn't get thanked, doesn't get recognised. And I think for the members of staff who think, I'm just doing my job, why on earth is he thanking me for just doing my job, is an important thing in terms of relationship building and atmosphere and ethos. The fact that if you come into my office from day one, there's no desks in the way, there's no furniture in the way. If I turn around to speak to you, it's open, it's welcoming. I've always been stressing that to all my other members of my team. I don't like things that create barriers between people. I think that's critically important. I think also the opportunities that we have at the high school, so we are very fortunate. We have daily assemblies where we can bring the whole school, including staff and pupils, together, both in the junior school and senior school. The messages of reflection each day, as well as opportunities to celebrate and recognise various forms of achievements across a whole range of activity and life in the school at all ages, is critically important. To spend the first 20 minutes of your school day reflecting and celebrating every single day before you go into class, before you go into the realities of a school daily, is a huge area. And it's one area that I would never, ever remove. When we've looked at timetable reforms, when we've looked at, how do we create more time for learning and teaching, it is one area that I have stood firm on, because actually the disposition of the individuals in those classrooms is being affected by those opportunities on a daily basis. And then making sure that you're highly visible and encouraging at any community event. I had people come into the school 3-4 times a week, and every time I'm more interested in what they're telling me about how they were welcomed, how they feel in the context they're in. And if they say the words to me, welcoming, warm, generous, then they're my litmus tests almost on a daily basis, Stuart, that the culture's fine. And I get very anxious when those types of things don't come. So as a leader, my number one thing is culture, being the chief communication officer for that culture, banging that drum for that culture in every opportunity you get, and being prepared to pick up the litter, wear your tie and shirt properly because you're asking the children to do it. Whatever it may be, you have to embody that. Why? Because I believe in it. It's not something I put a suit on and say, I'm going to do that. I want a school to behave this way. I just want a school to behave the way I want people to behave. And that's what I try to communicate in every setting. And your team around you, particularly your key leadership team, sharing those same expectations and values, so that ultimately they know, what would John do in this situation? What would John think in this situation? It gets as hierarchical, to be blunt, as that. But then we're mammals and human beings, and we are hierarchical. That is part of how we're wired. And it's being conscious of that. And I know as a deputy, and I know as a classroom teacher, that my behaviours very, very much were always influenced by knowing what was expected by the individual who had overall responsibility.
It's fabulous to hear how much weight you put on generating that positive culture within a school, across the staff, across the students, and you're talking about parents and visitors as well. So it's a huge thing. And I'm just putting myself in the shoes of somebody who might be listening or watching this just now. Almost inherent in culture is that it's sort of seen and experienced, and it's not really said or written down on paper. But when you talked about bringing your SLT on board there, yeah. Is there a framework for culture, or is culture just, this is the way we do it here, and it's so ingrained that people just feel it?
No, I think, and I might move on to resistance within this answer, so I might cut across other things that we'll come to later. But no, it's a very good point. I do think that one of the early things I did was recognise that the kind of distillation of this culture that I was seeking to build on, because there was a strong culture in the school, so I recognised that in taking on the role, had to actually be, in a sense, captured in some way, and captured in word and in picture, so that it could be more widely understood and shared. And therefore also involved in the strategic planning of the school. It's all very well talking about our values, our purpose, writing about our values and our purpose, but which all schools do, and it can be all a bit vanilla on occasions, to be honest, across schools in terms of what they're seeking to do. So wanting to capture that through discussions, through observations, through feedback from pupils, parents, the colleagues, etc. And then I set myself a task that by about 2017, I remember pulling together what was an overall strategic plan for the school. But really at the heart of it, 20% was strategic plan. But what I was trying to do in the first 80% was capture the culture of the school with certain key elements about what we do, why we do it, and how we know we do it. And they were really important to do. And I remember learning also as a leader that my communication around that wasn't great at the start, because as soon as you share something like that with your staff and you're enthused about it and you think, this will be great, they'll love this, most of them see a document or they see a PowerPoint and they think it's a whole new set of work that they're about to be asked to do and a whole new set of objectives. And I learned very quickly there that actually, no, 80% of what I'm sharing with, we already do it. We've just never actually written it down, clarified it, found the language for it. And now what's interesting, of course, yes, I'll be quite candid. You get the early applicants for internal positions in the school who have obviously read it thoroughly and reflect back some of the terminology that's in it, because obviously they're keen to get on. But over time, in a more serious and embedded way, over time, people actually come to speak that way as a common language and a common understanding as to what we're trying to do as a school, and more importantly, how we do it. And so, yes, it can be quantified. You write it down, you capture it in picture, but critically, absolutely critically, you have to live it and do it every day. Because and actually what you do, you want it to gather dust on a shelf somewhere, the document, but you want to see it every day. Or, as I was saying earlier, witness it at an inset and think, yeah, it's still happening. That's real. It might be written down somewhere, but now we don't need it written down because everyone's doing it. And yes, of course, in good self-evaluative activity, go back, refresh, reconsider, re-clarify in time as well.
I think that makes sense to me, doesn't it? Because we can't assume that everybody gets it right from the first moment they step into the school. And I know that some schools that I've spent time with, visiting and talking to, teacher turnover can be quite an issue, quite high levels, 30, 35, 40% sometimes, some years. And that must have an impact on culture. What are your thoughts around ensuring that the work that you're doing isn't sort of diluted or distorted?
Yeah, and I think that's where the idea, to use that phrase, distributive leadership, etc. I'm not a big fan of using big technical terms, because all of a sudden it creates a model in people's minds rather than the relationships that are involved. But in that, it's really important that when people are being onboarded and joining the school, that you have key individuals in that role. So I'm very, very conscious that when someone is coming in, other members, not leadership members, and I think this is important, not having the SLT of your school, the senior leadership team of your school, control all of that. Actually having a culture in your school, to go back to culture, where your staff, your existing staff, have imbued the culture and expectations of the school and the behaviours, and it's critical, it's about the behaviours, and that they are conscious as a head of department or as a mentor that's appointed to introduce the individual, that they are sharing those expectations with them by how they interact with the colleague and so forth. And it's making sure, and you're quite right in terms of turnover of staff, and in some cases it can be significant in schools, it's how you use the core of the longer term staff within your model to continue to be the welcomer. And what I love at the high school is, I've got heads of department who will immediately be telling me, we're sharing the expectations of what we're doing. How's X getting on? I may ask them, and they'll say, don't worry, we'll get him there. Now, what they really mean by that is not there's any problems in the classroom or the teaching or whatever, just the expectations and how we do things. But also, I think we're social beings, and so the kind of osmosis that happens within the staff room, the osmosis that happens within departments, trying to support and encourage activities amongst people, amongst staff, silly activities that bring them together, and giving license to that as a leader. Sort of when people come forward with ideas, just saying we'd like to, and it's like 9 times out of 10, get on with it, do it. Give people license, give them autonomy to do that, so that they see that there's some trust there and some humanity there. And I think those play a role. But yes, as a leadership, you have to also be very mindful that where you have staff turnover, that you're thinking carefully about induction and your induction processes. We've certainly changed ours over the years, even in the last few years. We do a lot more before an individual joins the school, to engage with them, compared to what we used to do previously. Why? Back to culture and expectation, and trying to do that in a very human, generous, and good-humoured fashion before they actually have to walk over the threshold on the first day type of thing. So yes, you have to give it real thought and consideration. It's not as simple as just, it'll be fine because we're all nice people and they'll pick it up. That way lies the disposition of the dissolution, of any kind of culture, and uncertainty. The child in a classroom, back to your classroom analogy, if you're in the classroom and you don't know what's expected, then we have the behavioural issues that arise from that. Where there's inconsistency, we have the behavioural issues that arise from that, or the lack of attainment that arise from that for that individual child or a group of children. We're no different as adults. Absolutely no different as adults. That doesn't change. And therefore, those aspects about expectations, those aspects about consistency, those aspects about personal autonomy are just as critical and have to be fostered and considered, and have to be seen as real and important in a leadership role, rather than simply just, improvement plans and all the other aspects that go with the role.
That makes perfect sense. And it's interesting because we're trying to establish a level of consistency with the things that we want to keep, like the culture, etc., amidst perhaps a flux of staff and other changes. But education is always changing. You mentioned that in your first point. Technology, obviously, we had the pandemic and the needs of young learners are perhaps different than they might once have been before. All sorts of change, never mind trying to implement more sort of research-based approaches to teaching and learning, or whatever that might be. So I suppose a big question here is, how do you manage change? Because the high school is not the school that you took on 10 years ago as rector, and particularly, and this is the big question, particularly when faced with resistance.
Yeah. I suppose I could start at the end first, and I would say that in all, back to culture, and I'm sorry to keep harping on, but back to culture, you obviously want to have a culture. I would say we've got a culture now, and I'll explain in a second how you get there, but we have a culture now where resistance to change is limited. Why? Because if you have in your school, and particularly within your staff in terms of their professional development and their professional understandings, if you have groups such as teaching and learning communities, digital learning communities, if you encourage staff to lead those. So, and again, I want to say I'm a big fan of getting management out of the way and leaders out of the way. We create the environment, we provide the support, and we certainly provide the encouragement, but actually handing it over to the teachers and to those in the classroom and to peers themselves, and encouraging that and instilling that means that if you've got lots of, which we do have, we have twilight sessions, we have peer-led leadership, peer-led sessions on a whole range of teaching and learning strategies and approaches, etc. That then, even at our board of studies, which are our heads of departments in the senior school setting, they will share more than just be brief. They're involved in discussion, etc., around teaching and learning as well. In our junior school, it's a weekly basis where that happens on a weekly basis within the junior school as well. So having those aspects means that you've always got some pioneers there within your staff that are looking at good practice or research and data that are keen to explore and to lead something. It's not coming from top down. Top down, you'll get nowhere with top down. Top down has its place. COVID, we have to do this. Why? Because we have to do this, so we're doing it. I'm not too happy about that. I'm very sorry, you're very unhappy about that. We have to do this in a nice way, but that's what you're ultimately doing. So top down has its place. But in terms of managing change and evolution in aspects of teaching and learning, or for example, around issues around child protection and safeguarding, whatever it may be, and particularly even greater now, the challenges of neurodiversity, which is a great thing to see in terms of the developments in teaching and learning in that area that's coming through with the effects of understanding with neuroscience and so forth. For all of that to be managed and to come through, you need to be in a situation where you have pioneer teachers, you have individuals who feel that they have support and encouragement from the leadership to have the autonomy to do these things. Because when I've faced resistance, I've found, and there has, I can think of, for example, phonics in the junior school in recent years, and the introduction of a new approach to phonics. And there was initial resistance. Our literacy levels are X. Why do we have to change this? Well, they could be slightly better. Yes, but our children are still, performing 1.5 years ahead of where their chronological age is, etc., etc. So then you bring in the research. You bring in the fact that you start it on a small scale. Let's just, with a couple of pioneers who are staff that are very keen and engaged, you let them run with that, obviously to evaluate and so forth. You let them lead the dispersal of that thinking, as well as any amendments within your own school context that are required, because they have a better handle of that than even the leader would, because I'm not in the classroom every day doing that. So all of that plays a role. So I start small. I have little pilots. I look for pioneers. We encourage that culture to be like that. And having said that, if teaching and learning is something which is constantly explored, talked about, peer-led, within the school, then those are, and pastorally as well, then those things mean that resistance of change is muted. You will always have individuals who are ultimately going to disagree. You'll always have individuals who are not comfortable with something, and it's looking at it's putting yourself in their shoes. What would make it better for them? What is the difficulty? Is it as simple as terminology, or is it something more philosophical? And actually trying to say, well, what would help to move it from feeling 6 out of 10 to that to 8 out of 10 to that, and working that through with people as well. So it's a number of features that can help you evolve that change. But what I find wonderful is, back to what I was saying earlier, is that we have insets, we have training events, and it's coming from staff themselves, and a willingness. So you hit a tipping point in your school. You've got to work at it. It doesn't just happen, but you hit a tipping point in terms of the culture and the preparedness of staff to engage with those aspects. And pioneers are really important in that, within the kit. In the same way as in your classroom, you've got your pupils who can be good pioneers to help what's going on. Very similar in that regard.
I think that's wonderful how there's such a strong theme or a kind of core of culture coming through in almost every aspect there, because now we're talking about change, but if the culture's set in such a way that people are more receptive and willing to, at least consider change and are open to a conversation about, we've done it this way for so long, here's an alternative, here are the reasons why, I think it's really powerful. Because I feel sure that there'll be school leaders who think they're maybe banging their head off a brick wall, and this is what we must do, but we can't bring people with us. So bringing people with us is so powerful. And you're talking there again about activating pioneers or champions, giving people that extra freedom, and that's a lot of what people really value in their workplace. Is not necessarily having a fancy title or a really great salary. Those things might be nice, but knowing that you're trusted, knowing that you're able to have a conversation with your line manager or whoever that is, the leaders in your school, about something that you're interested in. And I think this might be good for us. Can I explore this a bit further? And giving people that freedom is such a powerful thing to do in terms of staff development.
I think on just very quickly on that, a thing I remember as a young deputy leader when I was a housemaster. So I was a housemaster in a boarding school, and I was looking at how things were operating in the sixth form, and I thought, I've got some ideas about this. So anyway, I compiled, did some research, did some thinking, looked at other things, put together a proposal, and just took it to the head of the school. And those proposals are still in existence today. And I ended up getting a promotion and various other things out of it. It wasn't my intention to do it. It was just, to be honest with you, it was to, address certain aspects of the pastoral world that I felt would benefit the school. So we did that. Now, that then, as a leader, as an individual, never mind a leader, influences me. And therefore, when I have colleagues that will come and sort of be talking about, I'd like to bend your ear about possible applications for future promotions and opportunities, John, I'll tend to then put it back on them slightly in a constructive way of actually saying, well, go and identify something, go and find something in this place right now that you think we could improve on, and come back to me and we'll get on with it. We'll find a way of doing that. And so along with the old classic of, I like the people that just go and do it and then go, by the way, John, I did this and I hope it's okay type of thing. And that's fine too. You can get the forgiveness later on, but encouraging that risk. And what I've found actually, and particularly back to what you said about the school, and we're a very successful school, we're a very successful we're well known for academic outcome, although most of that comes, I believe, from our culture, not from, labouring the point in the classroom, as it were. And therefore, that can create a great conservatism and risk averseness amongst teachers around change, because some of them will just look at the outcome metric of an exam grade rather than the whole child and the whole context. And as a leader, that was not now, but that was an early challenge of trying to make colleagues understand that you do trust them, that you do value them, that you want to encourage. And that's where, back to your visibility as a leader, going around one-to-one conversations, wherever they may happen, seeing a good bit of practice and catching up with that colleague later and saying, by the way, I just came by your class and yeah, I thought that. And that will make the world to those individuals. But you're not just doing it in a kind of contrived manner. Back to being you, you're thinking, oh no, that was great. I want to go and tell you that was great. And when that permeates, if you do that and that permeates and you encourage your own other senior leaders around you to do exactly the same things, then that permeates amongst your colleagues, and gradually their level of trust and value that actually you're not out to make life difficult for them. You're actually there to encourage them to take risk is really, really important as well. And that's something I've always sought to encourage. Some cope with it better than others, but it's something it's really important to try and encourage as a leader. Otherwise, you'll have very, very risk averse and you'll face a lot of resistance. But that resistance is of your making, not of your colleagues' making.
What you've touched upon there kind of lines up with what I was going to ask you next, which is really about the sort of key essential qualities that every school leader should really possess. And I think if you can reflect back on your own career, you're probably already going to say things like openness, honesty, our understanding of our own limitations. But what other qualities do you think school leaders should possess?
I think a couple of qualities that I would add to those is that I've had to learn. So one of my professional things that I really had to learn, and it was pointed out to me from a colleague I was just talking to last week in Belfast, about 25 years ago when I got my first promotion. And before I left that school, he said, John, before you go and take that role, one thing you could do. And I said, what's that, Ian? And he said, listen. And I had that conversation with him last week. And I took that with me. It's something that has always resonated with me. Listen to people. Sit in meetings, sit in, school assemblies, sit in classrooms, whatever, and just listen. Really listen. Listen to the cacophony of different views, thoughts, whatever it may be. And really listen and be active in that listening, and then demonstrate that listening, which is important. Not simply I've listened but I've not been convinced type of answer, but actually I've listened and I'm going to demonstrate that I've listened by either the approach we take to a particular matter, or the tone of voice that we take, whether it's in written or verbal, or the policy amendment or change. Or for that matter, we decide, as I have done in my time as well, actually, do you know something? They're right. This isn't going to work, and change your mind. And it's really important. I've often thought, subjectivity and objectivity. Well, objectivity is just a further aspect of subjectivity, but it's the bit where you're prepared to change your mind. And that's what you're doing. You're prepared to change your mind. And so listening is really important. Being constantly curious is key. Being a person that's constantly curious and thinking, I don't know everything, but actually there might be better ways of doing this. There might be more valuable ways of doing this. Back to that restless school concept that this is not a finished thing. This is something that just keeps moving. It's organic. Get over what other people think about you. Don't be a person that worries about what other people think of you, because all you'll do then is be a follower. You won't be a leader. And that to me was a struggle at first, I'll be honest. I like to be liked. Who doesn't like to be liked? But all of a sudden you're in a position where you're going to make some decisions that people aren't going to be like you for. And therefore that goes back to be you, be honest. And therefore candor. Are you someone who can be candid with people, open, supportive, empathetic and understanding? Always remember people, I found during COVID, for example, one of the first things for me during COVID was to remind myself that not everyone was where I was with COVID. They were all in different places in terms of the response, whether they were a teacher, a pupil, or a parent, and how you then manage and empathize. So putting yourself in other people's shoes is not just a kind of glib, nice thing to say. You'll make mistakes if you don't do it. You'll make big mistakes if you don't do it. You'll affect credibility if you don't do it. You'll affect confidence and trust if you don't do it. It's real. It's a hard thing. It's not always easy, but you have to do it. And also, I would say, keep fit, try and rest. Important in your qualities is righteous selfishness. Be selfish. And this is a hard thing, particularly in the caring profession. I learned that if you give too much, you run out of gas. So what use are you to anyone? The old sort of empty cup thing. You know, you can't drink anything from an empty cup. And you're really important in making everything tick that we've been talking about here, Stuart. And so from that point of view, actually taking time to yourself, despite the guilt of, I could be doing this, I could be at that event, I could be doing this, is something I've learned to become very disciplined about. And I see it as a kind of righteous selfishness. And in fact, also within my working week, every so often I'll say to myself, right, I'm not going in on Wednesday morning. I'm just not going in. I'll do some work at home on Wednesday morning. You know, why? Well, if I'm even there, what am I doing? I won't be doing anything other than sitting and work, doing what I'm going to do at home. But I might be a better person for everybody else I've got to engage with come Wednesday afternoon if I stay at home. So it's those types of, having those kind of thoughts about how you behave yourself and look after yourself is absolutely critical. But getting over what people think about you is to me a really important thing too. You're there as a leader. I'm the rector of the High School of Glasgow. Well, there's been 52 rectors of the High School of Glasgow, and come next summer there'll be a new rector of the High School of Glasgow. So you're wearing a title as well. You're looking and stewarding after a title and looking to pass something on. And if you let your personal side of what people think about you start to affect being the rector, then you're not looking after the role and you're not looking after the school. You're just looking after your own feelings about what somebody thinks. And that's a really unhealthy mindset. And you won't sleep well either. So you don't want that either.
Of course not. And as you said there, sleep is so important. John, I really appreciate everything that you've shared there. And again, you know, I mentioned this at the beginning. You've been very open about your own experience. You know, leading a school is a terrific responsibility, terrific opportunity. And but it isn't all about you. I think that's what you're saying there. It's really all about everybody else.
Absolutely.
And that's what to do is remember, you know, your place is almost as a sort of facilitator and a guide, but that you don't shoulder it all yourself, because that will never lead to the success of the team. That will lead to the burnout of the individual and the disintegration of the team, I suppose. Now, I'm sure everybody watching and listening has got a sense of the passion that you have for education and the passion that you have for educational leadership. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you today, John. Really appreciate you coming, and you know, I hope we can pick up. I'm sure we could have talked for another hour, so I'm sure we can pick up again in the future. So thank you so much for everything.
Thanks for you. Thanks for the opportunity, and I hope it was of some value.